So, welcome to Socrates Cafe. We've been doing this here in Denver since the Friday after 9/11, and we get together, pick a topic, share our thoughts, and then ask each other questions. And it's a lot of fun. It's casual, informal, and there's no reading assignment in advance, but most of us read, and I always find new things to read about after the meeting, but there's no homework to do, so that there's nothing to keep people from just showing up. Walk-ins are welcome, is what we always say. So tonight we're doing it a little bit different way. Kellie has put together sort of the opening talk. Then a couple of us share our thoughts on what Kellie shared about. And then we'll take turns asking each other questions. So at the end, we have time for final comments. In the questioning period, we ask a particular person a question, and we can ask one follow-up question. At the very end, though, there are final comments, and that gives us all a chance to share anything that's on our mind. So it's a lot of fun, and I learned something every time, and especially tonight. I'm very glad Kellie's here. She's got a strong background in what she's going to share about, and here's Kellie.
Well, I'm excited to just talk about this with adults because I spend my whole time with children, and I can't talk about religious, spiritual things with children. It's against the code in education. So it's kind of nice to bring a topic of music to people that I'm interested in, that I can talk about it with. Just for the sake of definitions, I would say religion, spirituality, define it as you define it, just from anywhere from a specific way to just anything that's beyond the workaday life, beyond the here and now, something that makes us think beyond ourselves and is inspiring. The question I want to explore is, what is music as art? Not pop music or entertainment music, but music as art specifically. David Whitwell talks about different types of music. He's a composer, conductor, musicologist. He says music can be written for educational purposes, music can be written for entertainment, for money, for jingles, for persuasion, and none of that is specifically what we're talking about. We're talking about art music. The lay people would call it classical music. The study of aesthetics is the study of art and music, the beauty of life. And again, capital B, that's the kind of religious aspect, the spiritual aspect, that it's the beauty that really brings out something new in us, something that brings us beyond our everyday humanity. And music is art, as art is that. You can go through the ages and listen to or read about a lot of different people's views on what art music is. Clear back, like with Pythagoras and the Greeks, they say that music and math were the same. Math was a representation of the macrocosm, the cosmos. You could use math to understand the universe, understand God, understand reality, and bring that down into the human nature. And music was basically that very relationship, only through sound. They used mathematical relationships on the monochord to develop the different pitches, and use those pitches to denote different parts of the whole being. Martin Luther, with the Reformation, he was very strong on music, felt that aside from religion, music was the most influential and powerful thing that a human being could experience, the most powerful moral tool a society has. Music was central to everything he did. In the late 1800s, at the turn of the century, Paris was very big into synesthesia. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's when the senses basically coalesce. People who are able to see sound in color. Color actually has a sound for them. Certain things have a smell that others of us just see a physical reality to. It's the blending of different senses. Debussy, Monet, Rameau, Watteau, all these great artists and composers and literary figures of that time literally wrote art music, or made literature that really coalesced all of the senses, again trying to bring a very spiritual whole into the human being. Stravinsky is known to be conducting his orchestra, rehearsing with them, and would literally be yelling out to a certain family of instruments, "I need more blue, I need more green," because again, he's seeing all the colors. Wagner, Scriabin were very interested in theosophy and spirituality and the transformation that music as art could bring to the human being. The Wagnerian, according to some scholars, all of his operas, the 9 in particular, are literally there to go through a human evolution. He didn't let people clap after a performance because it disturbed the energies and the colors that were circulating among the room from the music that came. Rudolf Steiner is a occult scientist and a regular scientist as well. Lived in the 1920s, early 1920s. Wrote volumes on various things. One of his focuses was as a seer, he was able to look into the higher worlds and see things beyond the physical realm, and he could see the realm of tone and the realm of color and how it interacted, and he felt that music itself was the most direct way, the most direct art, that things beyond the physical realm affected the soul of the human being, that literally tone changes the human being, helps them directly to interact with the spiritual worlds. Dr. Greenberg is a composer currently living, musicologist, works at San Francisco Conservatory, and he talks about, in a real mundane way, music as a mirror, that if you look back through the eras, you can see the types of art music that was written and composed for that era. Literally at the beginning of that era was taking all of the change that was coming forth from society, societal changes, intellectual changes, spiritual changes, and that the music literally represented that. The composers were on the cusp of all that change, and in their own way kind of ushering it in, if you will. To conclude here with a paragraph written by Corinne Helene. She is a seer mystic. She says, "The evolution of man and the planet on which he dwells may be traced musically as well as spiritually. In so doing, it is discovered that both tracings proceed simultaneously and along parallel paths. The two stand apart only to our limited perception. In their essence, they are inseparably united, and in higher realms of being, it is recognized that musical understanding and spiritual realization are identical." And so I come back to the question, what is music as art?
So that's our topic, is what is music, and that's really terrific. Now what we do is take turns asking each other questions. A good question comes out of genuine curiosity about what the other person has said, and we can ask one question and then a follow-up question of the same person on the generally same line of thinking to go deeper into it. There may not be a follow-up question. So I'll start with the first question, and then we'll go to Henry, and then, but before we do that, Henry and I are going to share our thoughts on the same topic, and then we'll ask each other questions. So I'll start, if that's okay with you, Henry. And Philippe Entremont said something really interesting. He was music director at the Denver Symphony when I was helping him sell tickets, and he thought we made too much out of music education, and that it was creating a barrier between people who could come in and benefit from the just hearing the music. He said, if you want to learn about good music, buy a ticket and come to a concert. And he said, come even if you have a headache, because maybe it'll take your headache away. And I just loved the way he said that. I sort of got a sense of that from what you were saying. Is that sort of congruent with what you're
Probably
talking
part of
about
it.
here? Because these people have studied it, they've written about it, they've taught about it. It's important discipline to a certain group of people. But you might have the same thing with people that make ice cream. But, you know, I can still eat the ice cream and appreciate it even if I don't know all that. Is that true
yes.
in music, do you think?
I would say so. The whole point of it is that you're just being totally permeated by the force, literally a force of it, and that it is affecting you at a very higher level. I certainly think there's a lot of support that says scientifically it helps us be smarter, it helps us relax, it helps brain waves slow down, and meditation can be better. There's all sorts of things to it, but yeah, we don't have to be educated about it. A lot of movement right now is talking about how classical music has made itself elite in some ways and removed itself from the people, and people think you have to be educated to understand it, and it's not that. It's for everybody.
It's really not true that you have to have had a PhD in music education to hear something and appreciate it.
No.
Is all music like that? Would that be the hallmark of good music? For instance, as an example, if I really kind of am educated a little bit, I start getting a glimmer of what rap music is about. But when I just was initially exposed to it, it kind of repelled me. As I understand it, modern music kind of had the same audience reaction. I guess, I'm not sure who it was, but they had a concert of this modern music, and that couple of people actually fainted because it was so different than what they'd been exposed to before. Does it make sense to think about the hallmark of good music is that it's easily accessible by everyone, and that therefore there are some things maybe in modern music or in rap that wouldn't necessarily be in that arena? Or is that not a good way to think about it?
According to what the premises is what I was talking about, that it would have to be music as art, and that is a real elitist thing, makes a lot of people upset. It's the idea that, you know, if anything made for any other purpose than genuine aesthetic art as an appreciation of beauty and the grandeur of mankind, humankind, is not music as art. Anything written for educational purposes, no matter how wonderful it is, isn't art music. Anything that's written for entertainment, for money, for fame, glory, that's not what it's about. It's the great artists that are so involved in just the cutting edge, what's new, where we're moving to. They're creating art for art's sake. Beethoven didn't write for anybody but his own creative mind. Mozart just wrote what was in his head. He literally said, I just write down what's in my head. I'm not creating, I'm just writing it down. So according to, like David Whitwell, he would say art music has to be of a certain quality. And does that mean it's always pleasant? Do you guys, what do you think? Does art have to be pleasant? Does it have to be enjoyable to be good? Do we have to be entertained by it, or can we be stretched by it? Can we be annoyed by something, hate it, and have it still be good quality art?
You know, I think there are certain tribes or families or something where music is an essential part of their life. And it's not always, you know, the the well-to-do. It's sometimes, as I understand it, in Italy especially, and maybe some other places in Europe, it is just a vital part of even a very poor family's life to go to the opera and experience that. I've tried to go to the opera. It's an acquired taste, and I would love to like the opera. I had a really good friend, and he liked two kinds of music. He liked opera, and he liked country western. And he thought they were very similar because they both told stories with music. And it's interesting. There's so many genres, styles, types of music, and everybody has their own ideas on what's good and bad. And in a matter of taste, there is no disputing. And some of it is clearly taste, I guess. The phenomena of rock music concerts is something that I think is slightly overwhelming. I cannot imagine that many people showing up, and then here's this rock and roll band, and they're really not close to them. It's not like an intimate setting, and it's the excitement, and you have to say something's going on there for those people that is positive for them, or they wouldn't be doing it. But it's something I just can't quite understand. Now, if it's up at Red Rocks and it's on stage and it's there, then I can sort of get it. But to be standing up for 3 hours listening, I just don't quite get that. And so when I'm thinking of good music, I'm thinking of good music. And Gene Amel shared something with me, and then I'll stop. But he, when I was helping the symphony a little bit, I talked to him, and he said, well, one of the things that's a mistake, he said, don't call it classical music. And he had the #1 classical station in the country. And he said, we had a style rules that we followed when we talked about it, and that's one reason we were able to build an audience. But we would never call it classical music, because a lot of people think, well, classical, I don't know that I'm classical, and they wouldn't listen. But if you just say it's good music, well, everybody likes good music. So they tune in, and if we can get them to tune in and listen, they'll like it. And then he also had a very conversational approach to being the guy in the morning, Sunrise Serenade. He'd do the first show in the morning, and it was great. I used to listen to it early every morning, getting ready for school. And then I got a chance to meet him, and it was really great. But he had an appreciation for good music, and he was able to share that in a way that attracted people. And I think his station is one of the reasons the Denver Symphony had this long period of big success. I think that really helped him. And so those are my thoughts on good music. But thank you for the background, and the colors was very interesting. I may have a question for you about that later on. All right, well, now we'll take turns asking questions. I've already asked one, so why don't we start with Henry, and we'll go around that way. I may have another one, and we'll maybe just do one or two questions each, and then we'll do final words.
I guess my question for you is that how do you tell the difference between where the the commercial question, wrong. How do you tell where the political message morphs into a commercial one? Do you see what I'm saying? Because they're talking about art music as having to do with just art, and I believe commercial applications were specifically not part of that, according to what I thought you said. Mm-hmm. How does one tell when you've crossed the line, or the gray areas, if that's the case, from commercial to political? And actually, does the commercial become political at some point? Sorry, that's for you to answer.
So you're asking if there's a different, when we tell the difference, where we draw the line between, say, art music and commercial or political music?
Yeah, are there any delineations? And I presume there probably are some kind of delineations, but I guess, yeah, that's pretty much the question, yeah.
I think just by something being commercial or political in its intent from the beginning, would define it as not art, therefore. Because the intent is to create something for a political message or a commercial message, as opposed to just making art. Am I doing something because I am just in love with this new technique and I've got to do it and I can't, it's inside me and I just got to get it out, versus I really need money and I'm going to sell this, or I really want to have people come to the Socrates Cafe, so I'm going to get this song out on, whatever. If you've got a motivation other than just being obsessed with the art and the concept itself, that probably would be the difference. It's a very difficult line. I've argued with myself over it many times, because people get really upset that I'm elitist about art music. So for a long time I tried to just argue that it was all equal, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. There's just, even going back to the Bach's music, everything he wrote was specifically geared toward the art form that he was creating, which was specifically geared to a certain amount of aesthetics, which even for his pieces that he made for his own children or his wife as study pieces, used those particular figures. Like, for example, they were in that era very interested in the doctrine of affections, which was the ability of a certain sound, a certain interval, a certain melodic content, very small little figure that would specifically affect a passion in a human being. And he used those constantly. I mean, his teaching pieces, the Inventions, for example, which are just gorgeous, small little pieces, have them in them all over the place. And so even with his smallest music, he was still using his aesthetic art form to create it. Does that make sense?
Well, do you have a follow-up question? There's something there that sparked your curiosity and you want to go deeper into to understand Kellie's thinking on that point, the disagreement, possibly.
I guess, well, it's difficult. I'm not sure this is, I'm going to go from a different angle on this, and there may not be much immediate correlation, but perhaps. Did I get what you needed as far as the question goes?
So how do we know if we are composers ourselves? How do we know if
it's art music or something else?
If it's art music or something else. I don't think we do know. The thing of it being art and being so beyond what's we understand at the time. I don't think we can define art music at the time. I think you have to look back. It's like the Baroque people didn't know what they were doing. They were just doing their thing. They were at the cutting edge. Bach didn't know he was going to be remembered all these years.
Did you say the Baroque people?
Yes.
Okay. I thought
yes.
you said the Baroque people.
No, Baroque.
Yeah.
I think it needs hindsight to know. Right now we don't know what's art music. Right now it's a really difficult time in terms of being a music teacher, because the musicologists have been able to look back and see that from 1900 to 1975 there is a definite style and certain things were happening, and so they have defined that now as the modern era, which leaves us now in 1975 to now with music that is contemporary, but we don't have a definition for it. So like when I send my kids to contests and we have to have modern music, do I have to cut it off now at 1975, and anything after 1975 is contemporary and no longer modern? And we don't know what contemporary art music would be, because we won't know until 100 years back or forward, and people look back and can see where was society going, what was the inspiration, what was the evolution. I don't think we can know that yet, I guess, is my answer to that.
That's a great point.
All right, well, thank you very much. So did you have a question? If you don't, that's fine, but if you have a question for Henry or for me, ask away.
let's just go on the premise that
Now, is this Henry?
both of you. You haven't talked very much.
Okay,
You want- We'll go
okay.
to John. We'll go to John. So, going with the premise that every so often, whether it's a 100-year period, a 75-year period, whatever, there's a period of music which musicologists can look back and see trends in about where society was heading, and therefore give a stylistic term to describe that music of that time. And giving the idea that it was cutting edge at that time and therefore representing cultural changes at some level. How valuable would it be then for, like, now, a modern person to listen to Baroque music versus classical versus Romantic era music versus modern music? Is it good to be able to go back? Can we as human beings living now grow by listening to music that was made for a time in the past? Do we carry all of those learnings and evolutions within us all the time, and we can all benefit by going through them? Or is there particular import in listening to today's music specifically for growth?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Call them the masters, and there is a certain set of music that is foundational, that's kind of part of our heritage as being human. And I always think of that as the music you can just sit down and listen to without any, maybe you've never even been to a concert before, but you sit down in that concert, the music can really touch you deeply if it's well performed. And then there is the music that's grown out of that, and I'm not sure it has that same quality. Maybe it does, and I'm just not, because I'm very limited. I was, in a way, the ideal person to sell tickets to the symphony, because I was thinking of what can we do to bring people in that maybe have never been before. And I always like, I think, good music because of Gene Amel, but I'm not sure I'd ever bought a ticket to a concert before I was working with the symphony. And so I was kind of putting myself in the place of the person that was sort of curious, might like to come to the first concert. And Philippe Bontremont really supported that kind of an idea. And at the same time, there was Joanne Folletta was leading the Denver Chamber Orchestra then, and she was just really bringing a lot of people in. And but how you market music is one thing, and then what's happening with the musicians is something else. And I think a lot of the music history and everything like that might be very important to the musician, but to the audience, it's a little bit of a different realm. And this accessibility, to me, is important. But also, then, the person that's mastered that, I can see that they would want to keep experiencing new things that have grown out of that. And they can hear in this modern piece, roots that came from back then. I can appreciate that. But I'm not sure everybody is as universally tied into that, because just a matter of time, not everybody can do everything. But I think that basic of the masters is something that hopefully everybody gets a chance to experience, is how I see it myself. I think the same thing's true in Western thought. There are certain people that have spoken that it's, worth at least knowing their name and a little bit about them. That's how I think about it. So any follow-up question? Anything? So I've got a question, and this is, as far as this commercial aspect, would you say the Messiah is good music? Because I'm pretty sure Handel was motivated by making money. So does that disqualify the Messiah? He did that in a short amount of time because he needed the money, and Christmas was coming up and he didn't want to miss it's like he was selling Christmas trees, and you've got to get them down by Christmas. Or so the Messiah, I think, had some commercial motivation behind it, and it is. I've always considered this one of these classics that everybody ought to really get a chance to hear at least once.
I think that, from my understanding, the Messiah, he has been known to have said many times that he did not write it, that the angels wrote it, that he literally heard the angels singing it and he wrote it down. So, I think there's a quality there that's beyond humankind just from that. All the composers also composed to eat. They had to. I mean, they were people, and that was their job. And so they had deadlines. It's arguable in my studies that, like, for example, Rossini and his many operas, he is known to have just kind of done things for money. I've got to kick this out really fast. I don't really want to do it. I'll borrow from this opera and this one, and I'm going to a new city and we don't have electronics and nobody's really heard my pieces, so I can get away with that. He was known to have done that, and a lot of his works aren't played. Some of them are just amazing, but some of them just aren't, according to the people who study them. So I think back again to the motivation behind it and how they're actually doing it. Beethoven, for example, wrote so many things, and the people were upset with him. His first symphony they liked because it was more in the right style of the time, and he was going somewhere else. And his second symphony and onward were just totally annoying to the people. They just told him, go back and do like the first one, and we'll come and you'll get paid. But he wouldn't do it because he's not playing for the people. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think there's something to a master composer. A master composer has something going on that's some sort of genius beyond what is typical of the time. And even if it does pay their bills, I think there's a quality in there that separates it.
So the commercial aspect is, if it's only commercial, then it kind of destroys this quality, which is like Willie Nelson, I guess, felt that way. He said he didn't write the music, he just wrote it down. And a sense of being inspired. And, his music was a lot different than, who you think of as a classical musician, but other musicians feel sort of that same way, I guess. Although Willie Nelson definitely was, had a commercial influence. He was making his living.
It's a very difficult thing. It is, and it's hard. It's very difficult to draw the line. I run a piano festival, and they often say, I have some teachers say, we need to have just modern music, and it has to be modern art music, and you need to qualify that. And I'm like, I'm not going to qualify that. I'm not going to say who's composing right now and they're living, if their music is going to be considered art music. I'm not going to say that. I don't want to be that judge, because it's very difficult. It's very gray lined. It's a hot
Have you ever
topic.
walked out of a concert?
Of art music, no. Of other music, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there room for one more follow-up here?
Sure.
What happens to this determination of the length of an era? How did that become part of the discussion, and who made those distinctions? I gave you a lot on your plate, I'm sorry.
I think just from my many discussions with people about the view of art music as something aesthetically different than other types of music, it immediately sets people off on annoyance, that it almost says that other music is bad or isn't quality, and I don't think that's at all what I'm saying. It's an idea that there's an aesthetic import to art music in terms of taking the human soul beyond the here and now and helping to move humanity forward into an evolutionary state that's beyond where they're at the time. That doesn't mean that New Age music, if it weren't allowed in this category, which I'm not saying it isn't, but let's just say it wasn't, that it doesn't mean that there's not a quality to it. There's nothing wrong with, like, if you're trying to compare maybe the Mona Lisa to a graphic novel or comic strip art, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with comic strip art. It just has a different purpose, maybe, than the high, specifically aesthetic purpose of art. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I'm curious that you're making the distinction between, I'm sorry, you might have to restate what you just said about the comic book art. I'm sorry, what did you say when you said something about that?
If someone was to say that perhaps, and I'm not saying this, I'm just saying, trying to make a parallel, that someone might say that the Mona Lisa maybe is a higher quality of art than a comic strip art. And it doesn't devalue the comic strip art. It just is maybe in a different place. Is there a different place for the vampire novels that I can't pull out? First Night, First Light, what are they?
Twilight.
Twilight, there we go.
Oh, those.
Is there a difference between Twilight and Mark Twain? I'm not going to argue that, but one could say that there possibly would be in terms of aesthetic art. Does that mean that that's not valuable? Obviously, it's valuable to the society as a whole. There's a lot of mass consciousness going on around or was in the Twilight series. It doesn't deny the value or quality. It's just the type of quality. It's the purpose of it, maybe. And as far as who designates the time, it's the musicologists, people who study, who understand the trends and can really analyze the music and see what are the differences, and they designate it. That is not me.
How do you know it if you haven't? I mean, it may sound like a
My
dumb
son
question.
has it. He hears things all the time. My son is somewhat synesthetic. I taught him piano since he was 4, all the way through till his senior year, and I tried like the Dickens to get him to left brain read and all the typical things, and he just sees in color. He makes the most glorious pieces, and he hears them in his head, and he'll be at the keyboard, and I'm like, well, you don't know any of the theory, but you play in a particular key, you know how to modulate, you know where you're going. How do you know if you haven't studied? Well, he had studied the theory, but he didn't use it. And he says, because it's all the right color. These colors go with these colors. I don't have that.
I'm colorblind.
But he knows it. He
Does he
knows
write
the
it down,
sounds.
then?
He can't write it down because he doesn't have the left brain part of it.
Well, then is he able to play it the same way a second time, or is it different each time?
Oh no, he can.
So he has certain songs that are definite.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just random motion on the keys.
Oh no,
It's
he's created gorgeous
very
pieces, very
definite.
specific.
Interesting.
So he hears it, and he knows he hears it, and I know I don't hear it because I don't do that.
Well,
Like
I
the representation of the
think
music,
we're out of
which you
time.
can see it, you can hear it.
We're going to have to stop the formal part of the meeting, but thank you all for coming, and gives us a lot to think about. Music. Thank you.